in thinking about what should be done and how we ought to go about it. Obviously, the devil's always in the details, but there is really unanimity here as far as how to proceed, and that's good. I think that as we go forward, that the unanimity will be helpful. So with that, speaking of helpful, Senator Shaheen.
Well, thank you. And again, thank you both. And I think everyone has done a good job of pointing out the opportunities this presents to prevent Russia and Iran from coming back in and regaining a foothold in Syria. So I want to talk a little bit about the role of Turkey, because Turkey asserts that they could lead counter-ISIS efforts in northeast Syria, that we don't need to back the Syrian Democratic Forces that are led by the Kurds. So how real is that, and how concerned should we be about Syria increasing their presence in a way that would actually result in conflict with the Kurds? Whoever.
Thank you, Senator, for that question. When ISIS first took over large swaths of Iraq and Syria, the U.S. military did look to Turkey, thinking through how we could dislodge ISIS from Syria. And there was no presentation of an immediate, combat-credible, viable force of Turkish military that could be sent in. And if you look at what Turkey's doing right now, it is working through non-state groups like the Syrian National Army, the SNA, who is terrorizing local communities and committing terrible atrocities and human rights violations against the communities there. And because our local partner, the SDF, is now having to defend its forces and its communities from the SNA, there's less focus on ISIS, which gives ISIS more of an opportunity to reconstitute. Turkey is a NATO ally, and I do think we should be engaging very soon in a political and military dialogue with Turkey about what I think is a shared interest. Nobody wants to see ISIS reconstitute, and we should be looking at what the conditions are under which the U.S. military could at some point transition that mission. But there's no near-term alternative or viable, credible combat credible alternative to the U.S. military and the SDF right now. And part of that also is that Turkey does not have the forces to maintain custody of those 9,000 ISIS fighters in detention facilities.
And so what leverage have we got with Turkey in trying to engage them?
The U.S. SDF relationship has been the main irritant in our relationship with Turkey, but they do have some legitimate concerns. Their concerns are that the SDF has absorbed non-Syrian Kurdish groups like the Turkish Kurdish PKK, which seeks to create a state or an autonomous area on Turkey's border and threaten Turkey. I think that's a legitimate concern. The PKK is designated as a terrorist organization by the United States. So we should have a conversation with Turkey about its security needs and requirements. And ultimately, the future of the SDF is within a unified Syria. And because of our relationship with the SDF and the leverage and influence we have because of our sanctions and what our proactive engagement could bring to the table with Damascus, which Damascus wants, we are positioned to play a key facilitator and mediation role. Turkey can also be a huge spoiler and undermine the hard-fought gains against ISIS. So I think this will require hard-nosed, tough diplomacy, but acknowledgement of their legitimate security concerns.
And assuming the United States withdraws our military from Syria, how long will it take for ISIS to reconstitute itself in ways that threaten the United States?
Well, we've seen this before. We saw it in Afghanistan. When the United States withdrew hastily and without a plan, the Afghan security forces that we worked to train collapsed, and the Taliban has reimposed brutal rule over Afghanistan. And we know that when ISIS has territory in Iraq and Syria, it uses it to inspire, direct, plan and launch attacks from that territory. And ISIS has its army in waiting already in Syria. It's those 9,000 fighters in detention facilities, and it has the next generation of ISIS. It's the 40,000 ISIS-affiliated families in a detention camp. And there's no plan right now to rapidly reduce either of those populations in a way that would not jeopardize our security.
Well, so let's talk about that a little bit, because one of the things, my understanding is that we have turned back on the foreign assistance that supports security at Al-Hol, but that we have not continued to support the other assistance that engages families, that helps with the radicalization that's going on. And so how much of a concern is that? And I would say yesterday we had a chance to talk to General Kurilla, who is the head of Central Command, who indicated that there is a plan to reduce the number of people in the camps, and how important is it going to be to ensure that the foreign assistance programs that are available for those camps are there if we're going to reduce the numbers.
Thank you for those questions. So we also know how this works because of our post-conflict experiences in Iraq and Afghanistan, among many others, even from Europe in the 90s. So after deadly conflict, if communities don't understand what the plan is for them to remain safe, to be protected from the underlying drivers of conflict, to know that their kids won't step on unexploded ordnance, to know that they will have assistance in their homes and communities being rebuilt, that they'll be able to purchase food, that they'll have jobs, that their kids can go back to school. Those communities remain perpetually vulnerable and weak, and that's exactly what ISIS wants, which is why the non-humanitarian assistance should be turned back on, and we should be working with allies and partners who also share an interest in ISIS not reconstituting. I would agree with General Kurilla. One of the ways in which what families want to know when they're leaving these camps is that wherever they go, they're going to have those assurances. They want what we want, which is safety and a better future for their families and their kids. That requires funding, it requires leadership, and it requires assistance coordination with our partners and allies, and that's what I hope comes out of the Syria policy review that this administration is conducting.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Shaheen. Your reference, and I'll get back to this in the next round of questions, but the relationship between the Turks and the Kurds cause us no end of grief. Turkey is allegedly an ally.